In this lecture, we're going to discuss the availability heuristic, which is defined as by Kahneman and Tversky as assess the frequency of a class in the probability of an event by the ease with which instances or occurrences can come to mind. So how available is the information to you in your mind? How relevant is it to you? How real does it feel to you? And those things impact how you feel about it. So with the availability heuristic, events that spring to mind are things that are easy to imagine. They quote unquote spring to mind. Those types of events are judged to be more frequent. They are more highly vivid, they're more emotional, and they are more easy to be imagined. So you can see the impacts of this availability heuristic very often when we talk about marketing. The more vividly you describe something, the more emotionally you describe something, the more you can provide some sort of connection, the better the advertisement is going to be, because the more it's going to stick with you. So you see it played out, in terms of advertising quite often. In terms of our current situation, we are seeing the availability heuristic play out based on probabilities and our inability to accurately judge probability. So which is more likely to cause death in the US? Being killed by falling airplane parts or being killed by a shark attack? Both are very unlikely, right? But both are incredibly vivid. You can imagine them. You've seen Jaws. Falling plane parts. I feel like I've seen that in a movie and it skewered some guy in the head, blood spurting everywhere. I don't know, but you could picture it, right? So when it's super vivid and you can picture it, you're going to judge that to be more likely than it actually is. So we're seeing this right now. What is your probability of dying as a result of the coronavirus? Well, your probability is still probably really low, but because of the vividness of the events, because you are seeing, you're seeing the people in the hazmat suits and you're seeing all the information on the news, you're seeing memes about people saying, stay home, otherwise you are going to be intubated by an OBGYN, all these crazy things that are really vivid, really tangible, they're really attaching to us, right? So we overjudge the probability of a bad outcome there. So implications, what's more probable or plausible? When we talk about the crime rate, when there's a lot of media coverage on crime, people tend to overestimate the crime rate. Whereas if you don't hear about crimes on a regular basis, you may tend to underestimate it. Events that are more easy to imagine, such as a terrorist attack, something really vivid, something that we can interact with. Those types that we can imagine how we would feel, those types of things are easy to overestimate. But then events or outcomes that are difficult to visualize are going to be harder to understand, which is known as the interactive effect. If it's something that you can't really think of, before this, how would you, before we were in our quarantine right now, right? How could you imagine what it would feel like to be under quarantine, what it would feel like to not be allowed to leave your house except to go to work, if you're still actually able to go to work, which very few people, unless you're working in at a grocery store or a factory making medical equipment, or you're working in a hospital or some other nursing home, things like that, you're not able to go to work now, right? But how would you have felt about this beforehand? It's hard for you to imagine. So because that would have been hard for you to imagine, what's the likelihood that you would estimate that this would ever occur? Well, if you've never experienced it before, if you can't understand it, you would be more likely to underestimate the likelihood of this occurring. So what if the event is extremely negative, like COVID-19, right? So see what happened here. We entered into denial, right? Trump was saying, oh, it's no worse than the flu, and, it's not such a big deal. And then as more and more information started to come out and we couldn't deny, we eventually start to change our perceptions of it. But you are definitely seeing this availability bias in action now. it was so hard for us to imagine what life would be like with a quarantine, what life would be like with a pandemic, because we haven't experienced this recently, right? That we essentially just entered into a state of denial, the same way we do with, potential economic or environmental disasters resulting from global warming, right? We don't believe in climate change because it's so crazy. It's such a big thing to have to make the changes that we need to make to prevent it, that you see a lot of people just don't believe in it. They say that it's fake news, that it's not happening. The same way they were saying that the coronavirus was all liberal hype, right? That it really wasn't such a big deal. So we see these things play out. Now, how might you see this in terms of stocks? Well, you can talk about a stock that you had been doing really, really poorly. It becomes really hard for you to imagine it doing amazingly well. So Macy's is my go-to example. No, on Bloomberg, because I only have to type M for the ticker, right? Well, Macy's, it's just been going down and down and down, right? No one wants to shop in brick and mortar stores anymore. I've been saying that for the last 5 years, though. Now it's ridiculous because you're not even allowed in them. So how could I picture a major resurgence in Macy's? Could I picture that stock price going up so much? No, I really can't. I can't imagine how that would happen. There would have to be some major turnaround. Macy's would have to totally reinvent itself. So I'd say the probability of that, now in reality, the probability of it really probably is infinitesimal. But if they were to come out and do something huge, I might underestimate the impact of that first, right? So I wouldn't believe in it. So I would, in essence, anchor towards that lower stock price and not believe that it was going to go up as it in fact should, because I would be in this denial phase. Okay, so continuing on with the PowerPoint slides, what does this have to do with vividness? So in order to get your information across, you have to make sure that it's concrete and imaginable, something like visual, face-to-face conversations, TV communications, that it has vividness, that it can feel real to someone. So here's some examples of this. This is from a study in 1977 talking about, would you recommend a course or not? So these are end of semester course evaluations. And when the base rate of this is this is out of 5, 4.11 would recommend, 0.95 or 0.94 would not. Face to face, the recommendations was 4.73 and not was 0.5, so really close to the baseline. But when it wasn't done when these course evaluations were not done face to face, 33.33% did not fill out any kind, or did not, or when there was no physical in-class face-to-face interaction for this evaluation, 3.33 said that they would not recommend, and 3.33 said they would recommend, and 1.39 said they wouldn't, because it wasn't so real to them, right? You're not in class doing it, so it doesn't feel so real, so relevant, so vivid. What are the legal significance of this? Well, this is one of those things that you see, you might talk about in some pre-law classes, or you might talk about in terms of an advertising example. So you have the boring description: on his way out the door, Sanders, the defendant, staggered against a serving table, knocking a bowl to the floor. Okay, well, that sounds pretty vivid to me. I'm like, he's staggering, there's description. Okay, but it seems so much more real when you say knocking a bowl of guacamole dip and splattering the guacamole all over the white carpet, right? It's more interactive. I can see that more. It's easier to visualize. So in terms of my expectation resulting from that, I would think that it's easier to remember. So vivid information is easier to remember. The more vivid we are, the easier it is to retrieve from our memories. The less vivid, the more of the impact a delay would have. So the farther and farther you get from an event, the less probability you place on it, the less you remember it, unless it's super, super vivid. Types of information, we're more likely to remember things that are more persuasive. So we're more likely to remember case histories if we hear a whole story versus if we just read a statistical abstract. We're more likely to remember video presentations versus a written presentation. We're more likely to remember something if someone describes it using a personal experience that is valid and relevant and reliable and timely. If we can describe things like that, we're more likely to remember that information. So how do we use these insights? Publicize explicitly but non-obvious comparisons. So more people die from stomach cancer than from car accidents, right? Is that true? I have absolutely no idea. But the point is, when we are encountering new information, right, we have to realize that this bias does play in to our decision making and recognize that we may be in a denial phase, that we may be not incorporating new information the way that we should, or we may be overestimating a probability of an outcome just because it happened more recently, or it's easier for us to imagine, or it's more vividly described. So one of the ways you see that play out in stocks is when you see earnings announcements and earnings reports where the company comes out and says, this is what we're going to be doing. When they try to make these huge splashes in their announcements, they try to play it up. They try to make it sound really good so that you will believe it. So you will increase the probability that you believe that growth really will occur and that stock price really will increase.